Welcome back to the new video on my channel. I hope you liked the opening in the last one, and I hope to not disappoint you also in this one. Maybe the opening will not be as crazy as the previous one, but the game itself is kind of interesting, so let's jump straight into it. Alright, so as I've said in the previous episode, the differences between the 1200, 1400 and 1600 rated players are not so great, and this game will show it, I believe, because we will spot the similar patterns to the three previous videos in terms of the planning in the opening, strange lines in the opening, blunders, disrespecting or over respecting the opponent because of the rating difference, and stuff like that. So yet again, a game with black pieces. For the next video I will try to show you the game with white pieces, to not be showing only Sicilian stuff. But anyway, today we have another Sicilian. This time we are going back to the accelerated dragon variation, also without the d4 move, so it will not be an open Sicilian. Yet again, c3 was played. And if you remember from the few episodes back, in the Italian game, c3 is played in order to push d4, right? But then the opponent thought that, okay, maybe the b4 is coming, so I will play a5. And it was in the Italian game. In here we have the Sicilian defense, so a little bit different setup. Also, c3 might just be played to fight for the d4 square a little bit, but for sure the d4 may be pushed, but perhaps will not be, because the d3 is on the board as of now. And is b4 really a threat? I don't think so, because of the spin, at least, right? But I'm not sure why and how after then a3 move, my student thought, okay, b4 is coming, so I need to play a5. So as I've said, the differences are not that great between the 12 rated 100 player and the 1500, because as you can see, still we are afraid of monsters under our bed. b4 was never really coming, right? c3 was played in order to block the bishop and a little bit fight for the d4 square. a3 was played to perhaps give breathing space for the bishop, because perhaps opponent expected a6 b5 from our side, but never for the b4 move, right? Perhaps because of the rating difference, he thought that his opponent may have some mastermind idea behind it, and that's why he opted for a5. It's understandable for the psychological point of view, but it's not understandable for the chess point of view, because I believe that at this rating, if you really want to say that you are a much better player than the 1200 rated player or 1400, you then have to stick to it by playing some healthy chess in line with what you have prepared for each game. So for example, if you are a dragon player, you know that the b4 is not a threat really, you can just continue in here with your normal development, either with knight f6 or castling, or with the e6 97 castling, any way you want. Just stick to what you know, what you like best, and don't be afraid just because the opponent is higher rated perhaps. So yeah, in this game, as of now, my student did not show much more skill than two previous students, but we'll see if the trend will change during the game. So we have queen b3. I'm not a fan of this move. You played a3 in order to give the breathing space for the bishop, and right now the queen is blocking it, so I'm not sure about it. But then a4, kind of a nice move, taking over the b5 square completely. That's why a5 move from black was a very bad one. But continuing development, we end up in this position. And when you're playing black in the Dragon Sicilian against the closed Sicilian, let's say, you usually try to fight for the dark squares in the center. Let's say put the knight on d4, and if that's not possible, maybe push d5, trying to kick away the bishop from c4. If that doesn't work, maybe push a6 b5. In here, nothing works, because you pushed a5 instead of preparing b5, right? Because you allowed the opponent to pin you, and d5 is not coming, because the c3 is there and d4 square is not for your knight anymore. So that's why my student lacked the idea of how to proceed. So at this level, even though you might have opening that you play, ideas behind it, when the opponent plays something very new, you still struggle in the same way as the older you struggled when you were at the 1200 ELO rating level. So that's the case, and that's why the knight e5 move happened. I'm not the fan of this move because we will just create this war pawn structure. And also, what are the ideas for this bishop for later stages? What is the idea for this bishop for later stages? I'm not sure, right? So at this point, perhaps just going away from the pin was the best way to continue. Then maybe, just maybe, going back with the knight and then just trying to think about this bishop placement. Maybe b6, bishop b7, or maybe then knight d7, knight e5, trying to exchange some pieces if you are not comfortable with the situation, with the space that you have, etc. Knight e5 was, I guess, not the way to do it, mostly because our pieces still will struggle to find any place to go to. So that's how the game continued. Knight f6, knight f3, sorry, queen d6, rook a to d1, knight d7, etc. So we are maneuvering, but still, this bishop is blocked, this bishop is blocked, so the old problems are still there, while white is getting better and better. The most obvious plan is to play bishop h6, trying to get rid of this bishop, this king defender, and then trying to, let's say, create a checkmate pattern with queen h6, knight g5, and weakness to h7. Something like this perhaps, right? Anyway, finally my student went for the bishop a6 move, trying to get rid of this bad bishop, so the decision is alright here. And then we continue with an exchange and f5. When you are so long in such a bad situation without any positive idea, any movement forward, f5 will be the move that you will look for, seek for, hope for, etc. So I'm not punishing my student for playing that move, but yet again, we are kind of making those pawns worse, right? If the game ever opens in any manner, this may be a problem, and that's basically what happened in the game. But because we lack any other idea, we may try to play this. Perhaps it was a good way to say, all right, we are much worse all the time, so perhaps a draw will be sufficient for us. So maybe f6 move, trying to be very solid. Then perhaps even go for the, I don't know, if the bishop came to h4, which is actually not a good idea, we can just try to play a move g5, h6, trying to block everything. And with having this pawn controlling some light squares, we are just alright. Then we can say, try to place rook on f7 to make a square for the knight on f8, then g6, then double the rooks. Perhaps at this point we would be very solid, actually pointing out into the direction of the d3 weakness, etc. h4 is not bothering us, f4 is never coming, etc. So maybe that was the way to continue. f5 seems more active, but at the same more risky. So it's up to you to decide which option is better. The game showed that after bishop h6, knight f6, takes, knight g5, and then f4, we are in trouble yet again, because the things in here will become messy, and with inactive piece, not so active piece, and kind of an open king, we are not so well prepared for it. Okay, so there are plenty of opportunities here, trying to decide what to play. In general, we can grab this one, we can grab this one, we can kick away the knight. Perhaps you can just leave it as it is and play a rook a7 move. There are plenty of candidates move that we need to consider, starting obviously with the most forcing ones, which are taking either of a pawn. My student opted for h6, seems natural, right? Because we want to kick away the knight. If the knight goes away, the e4 pawn is weaker because the knight is not protecting it. f4 pawn is weaker because the rook is not protecting it. So it makes sense, right? However, white is not forced to go away with the knight. He can just grab the pawn on e5. And that's where the problem is, because after forced line here, here, and king f6. I'm not a fan of that, but anyway, it happened. e5, a very interesting move was played. It's just a bait for the king to take it, and unfortunately, my student, caught the bait. He just took the pawn. Practically speaking, it's very often very bad decision. You just have to accept the fact that you were worse for the most part of the game, and perhaps just go back with the king, allow the opponent to take your pawn, and then try to fight for your drawing chances in the end game. Because let's say after a move like queen d8, we may try to exchange the queens, maybe take over the d4 square, and if that happens, we are kind of alright, because we need to usually look for the sector of the chessboard where we are better or worse. And we have one pawn less, surely, but where is this pawn? On the queen side, right? So 4 against 3. But is this pawn really a threat? Like, if we would be able to place our both rooks on the d file, preferably on the d4 square, we would not face any problems whatsoever because of this pawn advantage from the opponent. Therefore, the position should be drawish, right? So not only we have to think about, okay, will we have one less pawn, or we will be equal in terms of the material, but also what is the threat. So in here there is no threat in the near future. Obviously white can just escape from the exchange and then push with d4 and then try to fight for the win. Surely we can lose in that way. However, it's perhaps an easier way to lose when you take the pawn. Obviously you don't have a material disadvantage, but you have the king stuck in the center with all the heavy pieces around him, so it's not ideal, right? So how the game continued? Rook g8, yet again, not really caring about the king in the center, which is kind of funny, caring more about some pawn on g6, whatever. d4 happened, rook e1 check happened, rook d4 happened, queen e7 happened, and how are you ever going to be able to survive this? I'm not sure. So yeah, the game ended, I would say not shortly, but it obviously should have ended shortly, mostly because of the inactivity of black pieces. But surprisingly, opponent playing white pieces allowed the queen trade. It's not the end of the world, obviously, but preferably white would rather keep the queen on the board. So perhaps at this point some queen f6 move was much better, trying to put more pressure to the b6 pawn, trying to place a rook on 7th rank perhaps, and stuff like that. There are many ways to win the game. Anyway, at this point black is still kind of hopeless really, because well, what can you usually do when you have such a rook, such a weakness, and such great active rooks from the opponent's perspective. But as you usually encounter on this channel so far, you know that the game is far from being over. So how did the game continue? Black opted for a4, a3 push, which is actually a good idea to fight for any side of activity, so that's nice. And then the other rook came to play, and we may see that, okay, maybe some check patterns, checkmate patterns may occur here, so that's what black wanted to do. And from this point onwards, even though the more and more pawns are gone, we may try to think actually about achieving something. Rook trade is obviously a good sign from the opponent, showing that, okay, I have so many pawns, I would like to win this easily, don't checkmate me, just exchange. But my student obviously didn't want to exchange, so he delivered a few checks. And only then, when the king went to g1, he went away from the exchanges. So at this point, it's clear that white is winning, mostly because there are too many threats. If we had one more tempo, let's say, so if the rook was still there, so after rook h6, perhaps the best trick that we had in mind was to play f3, with the idea that after g takes f3 we can win ourselves, and if the pawn is not taken, perhaps we can think about the promotion. But it is what it is. It was white to move, and they pushed rook d7, threatening with checkmate, and now delivering a queen promotion. So why am I even showing you this game? Like from the very beginning to the very end, it's clear that my student got outplayed and didn't know how to navigate the middle game, was kind of over respecting the opponent in the opening. The end game is pretty straightforward. Like, what's the case? Well, look till the end. So in here, obviously, white can checkmate in so many different ways that it's hard to count it. Basically, the easiest way to do it would be to play rook g6 checkmate, but at this point the pawn was taken here. White said, okay, whatever, I just take the pawn, what are you going to do? I can checkmate you in dozens of ways. Well, now the rook to g2 was played, and you may say, what's that? The king can just take the rook, right? But it's not the case, because the king is trapped, right? He has nowhere to go. The rook cannot be taken. So it was a huge mistake from the practical standpoint. If you have such a big advantage as a white player does, you don't play such moves. You cannot allow the opponent to deliver you this check and then the other, because it may end up very, very badly. However, in this game, fortunately for the opponent, my student opted for the rook e2 check, allowing the white queen to go away, giving the king breathing space and then winning the game. However, if the rook f1 was played, it's not clear yet if white will be able to win. Obviously, it is winning position because the goal is that white king has to go in such direction that would allow either to cover the check with the piece, or if the rook is, let's say, glued to the king, go to such a square when the check would end in the possibility of grabbing the rook in other way than just with the king, right? So in here it would also be not a stalemate. So that's the case. That's a trick that I wanted to show you because I believe that at this level, as I've said like 3 more times already, there are not so many differences between the players, but you have more and more tricks, more and more knowledge in your head, and that allows you to fight till the very end for the full point, or in this instance for the half of a point. So that's the case. Anyway, after rook e2, queen takes e2, obviously there is not much to show you, and the game ended very quickly. So we may jump straight into the outro. Alright, so as you saw, the game was not as fun as the few previous episodes. I wanted to point out that it's the mix of everything that we've already discussed in few previous videos. So first of all, as on the 1200 rating, players at this level obviously think on their own, but sometimes they just over respect the opponent or just don't know what to do, and they play similar mistakes to what the lower rated players do. So that was the first thing. The other thing that I wanted to point out, that even though you might have some opening at this level and you know more and more ideas in it, you still lack the idea when opponent plays in a very different manner that you are used to. So it's important to not only train the variations, but also try to learn the ideas with some explanations from the coaches, from the courses, not only just playing everything out. So that was the second thing. The third thing was here, trying to decide which are the best candidate moves, what are the candidate moves in general, how to define them, how to try to calculate them, and obviously not fall for some traps. And last but not least, all the tricks are possible in chess. So in here, black was very, very close to drawing the game, but the reality was different. So it concludes the not whole series, but the series of episodes where I feel the differences are not so great between the players. I believe that from the next episode the level of playing should increase, but will it increase? We'll see, because I've prepared some funny games, so stay tuned for those. Hopefully you like them. I am laughing even thinking about them. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that there is a hope for everyone in chess. So don't give up. If you are an 800 rated player, you can still play at least as good as those guys today. as the guys in the future videos, so don't worry, just keep working. Stay tuned for the next video, leave a like and comment, and see you soon.